Welcome to Pennsylvania in Focus. I'm Kristen Smith. Joining me today is the Center Square's Pennsylvania reporter, Christina Langell. There was a lot of UPenn news this week. Most recently, it looks like the university has agreed to the Trump administration's demands relating to Title IX. This is something that predates his administration, but it has to do with transgender athletes in women's sports. So tell us a little bit more about this agreement.
Yeah, so UPenn has kind of been in the crosshairs of the Trump administration since he came back into office. And particularly, there's been a lot of conversation about their allowing swimmer Lia Thomas to be on their swim team in the 2021 and 2022 seasons, which, of course, was during the Biden administration. And at the time, Lia Thomas was absolutely in compliance with NCAA rules. But as we all know, Donald Trump has issued 2 executive orders around trans rights and specifically one banning trans people from playing in the sport of their stated gender, and the other being one that kind of clarifies the use of the biological terms for male and female.
And what was the reaction from some of the advocates who've been really championing this issue behind the scenes? Well, and in front of the scenes too, if we're honest.
Those who say that they are advocating for women's rights are very, very happy about this development. So you have people like Paula Scanlon, who swam alongside Lia Thomas at Penn. She was very happy to see this win, something she's been pushing for in both state legislatures and around the country for a long time. You also have Riley Gaines, who has really come out in the forefront of this. She actually tied with Thomas for 5th place in an NCAA match, and initially was actually quite positive and supportive of Thomas, but then has since, of course, become a real firebrand for the issue. The Secretary of the Department of Education, of course, Linda McMahon, was very happy, saw this as a victory. And of course, for UPenn, it's pretty high stakes. So I think, we've seen this kind of push and pull with the Ivy League schools and how they're responding to pressure from the Trump administration. In this case, I think it was just a choice that they had to make, falling in line with the current legislation, like the current laws on the book, which include those executive orders.
You're right in saying that there's been a lot of pressure on UPenn and other Ivy Leagues, but it feels like University of Pennsylvania has really been in the news between this and Trump's reaction to them. And in fact, a couple months ago, he froze research funding for them in relation to this issue. There's also been questions about, the rate of tuition increases versus how many students are being enrolled and the confluence of that research money. We spent a lot of time looking into this here in Pennsylvania, but what has been said as far as the connection to tuition increases and University of Pennsylvania and basically how they're spending this public money in order to educate students?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of questions around it. You've certainly written a lot about UPenn, and I think there's kind of two different issues at hand. One, federal research money goes towards the advances that UPenn is making as a world-class research institution. And so I think we've seen in your writing quite a bit about how, taking that away isn't necessarily making any strides in the area of tuition and student experience and like what's happening with the very real problem of tuition in Ivy League schools and what's going on there. Not just Ivy League schools, of course, but, that's what's really been in the target. And as you wrote about this week, they had, UPenn specifically has been subpoenaed. So I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit more.
Sure. So the subpoenas are in relation to this tuition price fixing that is being alleged mostly on the House Republican side of the aisle, but it is a broad concern for a lot of people. And the issue at hand is that the University of Pennsylvania and Brown University, They've both not turned over the requested documents, particularly when it comes to their conversations with each other and other Ivy Leagues. The allegations here are that one of the ways that they collude on tuition pricing is to keep it high to help fund administrative packages, and that while there's a lot of financial aid for the very poor students, and it's not hard for the very rich students to afford these, six-figure tuition rates, you have a lot of students in the middle they have to rely very heavily on student loans, which for universities are allegedly a very easy source of money that they can rely on. But in effect, what this means is that students in the middle, which is a pretty large percentage, who have the talent, the ambition, the ability, are unable to achieve the same level of education simply because of their socioeconomic status. And so this is a trickle down effect. This is something that you see at Penn State University. You're going to see all the way down to colleges. And the Trump administration supports reforms to student loans and to the Pell Grants. Now, student loans have, been widely viewed as predatory among a lot of people, not just conservatives, but across the board. Of course, their solutions to that are very different. But the Trump administration also wants to reduce Pell Grants, which there's been a huge outcry over because Pell Grants are designed for lower income students. Maybe they work part-time or full-time, and they have to balance getting a degree with that. There's single parents. There's all kinds of students who use Pell Grants and really rely on those to get through school. So in a sense, the tuition at the Ivy Leagues, while it seems so far from removed from, say, your community college, when there's an exploitation of student loans, that trickles down and that results in, proposed cuts in other places like the Pell Grants. And that's at the whim of whoever is in the White House. So that's kind of what we're seeing right now. The other thing, too, that's important to note about this research money, there's a lot of debate about whether universities are, for lack of a better word, squandering that money or basically funneling it to make the administrators rich. Now, presidents of these universities make lots of money, over, six figures in certain cases. And so that's very, very high to it, or very high income, particularly in Pennsylvania, where we've seen some of its most prominent universities continue to raise prices while, the state-run systems have been able to hold steady. But the research money that they get, if you look at the University of Pennsylvania, some of the innovations that they've made over the last 50 to 75 years, they are things like mRNA vaccines, such as COVID, which they won a Nobel Prize for. They founded gene editing, which is used a lot in cancer research. They're the reason that we have cognitive behavioral therapy for mental health issues. There's a lot of really high profile discoveries that have been made in large part because of federal research dollars. So even though there's definitely some concern about the transparency of where this money is going, it's not to say that all of it is being dumped into the president's bank account. Really, there are a lot of really important research happening at universities that are being harmed when this money is frozen. So it's not as simple as, freeze the money and at least in this case, it feels like he froze the money and the University of Pennsylvania basically had to acquiesce because they needed their research dollars. They needed it in order to continue their innovations. So whether, your mileage may vary on whether you think that is appropriate or not, but that's the loose connection between all these issues.
Yeah, I think you've really ID'd, I know you quoted in your article, one Democratic legislator said, as usual, it's arsonists pretending to be firefighters. And we've certainly identified these very real issues. Tuition, what's going on with Ivy League schools about tuition. And instead of, kind of like directly addressing those, where we are seeing this sort of problem, like where UPenn's not responding to subpoenas about that. Instead, they're pulling strings through other issues like the trans athletes issue, which has obviously stirred a lot of emotion for people.
There's going to be no shortage of news here, not as long as the Trump administration is around. And, he continues this, widely popular among voters. So we should say this this, I don't want to say reckoning, but this reaction to the issue of transgender athletes' participation in athletic sports. So we will continue to follow this and everything else that comes up with University of Pennsylvania. So follow us at thecentersquare.com/Pennsylvania.